everyone. This is Hannah Kavanagh speaking, and welcome to yet another amazing episode of CUNY Uncut, the brand new student podcast where we talk about anything and everything, uncensored, unedited, and uncut. Today I'm here with a really great friend of mine. He's actually currently the president at Hunter USG. Ooh, ooh. Watson Fellow, majoring in poli-sci with a certificate in public policy, and triple minoring in vocal performance, Asian American studies, and human rights. I'd love to give a warm welcome to Dave Basnet. How you doing, Dave?
Hello, Hannah. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well, pretty good on this fine day.
Hey, nice. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Yeah, I'm super excited. So today we're actually going to be talking about, Dave, your experience with DACA, having been a DACA recipient. So I guess like the first question that I have for you is, tell us about your immigration story, because I know that you're from Nepal. You moved here when you were very young. So what was that whole process like for you?
Sure, yeah. So my story, like many other DACA recipients and undocumented immigrants across the world, is the same, but also each of our stories are very different, but you'll see a parallel through all of our stories. But my particular story starts in Nepal. I was born in Kathmandu, Nepal, and I moved here when I was about 8 years old. So we came to this country escaping political violence and turmoil that was happening in about the early 2000s in Nepal, when there was political transitions happening. And so as a response to that, there were thousands of refugees and asylum seekers fleeing the country, myself included, to escape the violence that was kind of wreaking havoc all over the capital and all over many of the remote provinces and villages throughout the country. And it's a kind of small country, so violence that happens in a nearby town is kind of quickly spreads to violence that happens kind of everywhere. And so as a response to that, we had to leave the country, and I moved to the United States. I moved to first Woodside, Queens, which is still my favorite neighborhood of all time, but moved to Woodside, Queens, and I lived in Jackson Heights and Flushing, and pretty much every major immigrant neighborhood you can think of I lived in for a little bit of time, until I moved to Long Island recently. So that's a little bit about how location-wise my journey took me.
Right. First of all, I just want to say, I'm so sorry to hear about everything that happened. I'm sure, having been so young, having to deal with all that, I'm sure it must have been a lot, mentally and emotionally. And especially adding, immigration status into things as well. I'm just curious, because with DACA specifically, it's that's given specifically to undocumented people in America, right?
Yeah, so the DACA program, or Deferred Action for Early Childhood Arrivals, was a program created by the Obama administration in 2012, and this program was meant to serve a very specific population, which was children that were brought here either illegally or through visa overstays in the United States. So the largest portion of DACA recipients, about I think 650,000 DACA recipients, are children of Mexican or Guatemalan or Honduran descent, meaning they were children that were brought across the southern border at a very young age, and sort of this was the Obama administration's response to help them adjust to the country, because they were brought here at a really young age, so they don't know Mexico, they don't know Guatemala, they don't know Honduras, they only know the United States. And so this was kind of a bipartisan accepted program response to kind of allow these children to stay in this country. And so part of that program was also those that overstayed their visa or fell into different categories, myself included. So the other around 300,000 DACA recipients are of Asian descent, Southeast Asian and South Asian and East Asian. And so Nepal being one of those popular categories, it is definitely an interesting status. And I can talk a little bit more later about the things that it helps and the ways that it hurts. But it's different than being undocumented in this country, which means you have absolutely no protections against deportation. At the very basic level, a DACA status protection is basically just protection against deportation. So at the basic level, that's what that is for youth, at least, that are under DACA status.
No, for sure. And it's great that, because I know that recently there was a lot of there's issues with the Supreme Court as to like whether DACA would continue to be implemented into law, and thankfully like it has. But I'm just curious, like before becoming a DACA recipient, like what did your day-to-day life consist of, having been undocumented at that time?
Sure. So I think my experience, and like I said, there's 11 million undocumented people in this country, and so a lot of my experiences are very similar.
Yeah.
But also, I come from certain backgrounds and privileges that other undocumented folks that don't have, and so my experience was very difficult nonetheless. It's things like navigating the college admissions process, right? Filling out a FAFSA, these are like things that, you're familiar with, and most most high school students across the country are familiar with. My guidance counselor sort of instructed me, hey, you should fill out this FAFSA form, this financial aid form. And I did everything that I was supposed to. I was a good student in high school. And then I come to find out that because of my immigration status, I'm ineligible for any federal or state financial aid. So I'm not able to receive any loans, any grants, even scholarships, like for academic merit. Because of my status, I'm not eligible for them. And so it was like a really rude awakening once I learned about these sort of obstacles that I didn't even realize my status kind of like presented for me. And so it's like the little things like that about life that, I didn't really understand until I kind of had to interact with these different systems before.
Wow. No, I'm so sorry to hear that. Because it's funny, like I was actually thinking about all that, because with FAFSA it does require like a lot of like federal documents and tax forms and things like that. I'm just curious, like being a DACA recipient, because like you've been here since you were 8, like you were so young, and like I'm just wondering how dealing with all this affects how you view yourself and like your personal identity, if it does.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, especially like you mentioned the Supreme Court right now, and we're looking at some of the most sweeping immigration reform in the country, that's being held up in the Senate right now. Like it's like a lot of, we always, like immigrant populations always find themselves at this like horizon, almost gonna get that reform, almost gonna get those protections through legislation and stuff like that, but it never comes. And I think that kind of limbo has been such an integral part of, I guess, the way I formed who I am, and I think I'm majoring in political science. I have all of these political and politicized interests, and I think that's no accident. My identity itself is politicized, and I think, and I share that element with a lot of different folks across the country that have their identities politicized, and so because my very sitting here in this office, my very being in this country is a political act. I think it forced me to engage and contend with what it means to be a political subject, what it means to, debate your worth, debate your existence in a course, and read about it as an opinion piece. These kind of daily influences really shaped who I was, and from an early age, this is a huge shared commonality between immigrant children, is that we often act as the guides for our parents for navigating legal documents and transcribing, translating, and we shouldn't be doing that as 8 or 9.
That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure as an 8 or 9 year old. I English is not my first language either, so learning English and then helping my parents translate documents is a crazy kind of experience, and I think because I've had to do that since I was so young, it's become whether it was a choice or not, I'm not sure, but it's become such an integral part of my identity. It's become an integral part of why I advocate for the things that I advocate for. It's become an integral part of the kind of difference I guess I want to make, and I think I don't like kind of some of the sentiment that goes around about DACA recipients and the dreamer idea that because the other name for DACA recipients is dreamer, and I don't necessarily enjoy that like term, and I can explain a little bit more why. But I think because this identity and this fact about my life it's such a trivial fact. It's literally the place that I was born, has become such an integral part of my life. I think inadvertently it's become really important in building my character, building who I am, building my likes, my interests, and also like influences why I'm in New York versus a different state, because there are other immigrants and undocumented immigrants and Nepali folks in New York. So that's why, my parents chose New York. So it like kind of found its way to influence some of the most major elements of my life. And so I kind of found myself, like wrapped up in it. And so it was like really huge to building, like to address like the core of your question. It was instrumental into building like kind of pretty much most things about me, I would say.
For sure. And it's like, it's great that despite all those trials and tribulations, like you managed to utilize those experiences to help other people through your research in migration and like through your work. Actually, I was going to ask you about your experience with dealing with immigration law, like on the border, because I remember we were talking about this a couple of days ago, and I just found it fascinating.
Sure, yeah. So early in my freshman year, I was really fortunate to win the Jeanette K. Watson Fellowship, which is a fellowship open to CUNY students from the 8 senior colleges and a couple of other private colleges in New York City. But it promises funding for 3 like unique summer internship experiences. And so my first summer experience, I was with the International Rescue Committee. And they are a world-renowned organization that rescues refugees across the world and across the United States. And I was based in the New York City headquarters office, but that was around the same time. It was like 2019. That was around the same time that we were seeing the worst elements of the kids in cages and conditions at the southern border. And I was an intern in New York City, but I was watching that happen on TV and reading about it, and I was like already in the field kind of, so like I felt like an urgency kind of to kind of go there myself and see what I could learn, what was actually happening on the ground. And so I worked with my supervisor to devise a sort of plan for me to get deployed to the southern border for about a month. Like I had like a month left in my internship, so I wanted to go to the U.S.-Mexico border for that month. And so I was an 18-year-old intern. I have never flown before, but like alone in my life. But here I was flying across the country to the southern border, and I helped work to open this brand new shelter for asylum-seeking families. So asylum is a little bit different than DACA, but asylum is sort of what we're seeing about on the news every single day. It's folks fleeing violence, persecution, political, social, for whatever reason, fleeing violence and presenting themselves at the southern border saying, I need protection, and sort of they take that risk, they cross. That's what you hear about people that cross the border. And so this was the particular population that I worked with at the U.S.-Mexico border, and being on the ground there myself was probably one of the most formative experiences of my college career. Being there as a DACA recipient was also a rather interesting dynamic to navigate, because most of the staff that I worked with were all U.S. citizens, and because we're helping asylum-seeking families, we have to often frequently interact with ICE agents, with Border Patrol agents, with immigration officials, and as a DACA recipient, it's a little bit different having to interact with sort of agents of the state kind of in that way. And so it was a rather interesting experience just personally, but in terms of the work, it was some of the most heartbreaking but most impactful experiences and stories that I've heard while I was down there. And the most formative experience was there was a 17-year-old teenager, and I'm not going to say his name for his safety, but it was a 17-year-old teenager from Guatemala. I was 18 years old. He was with his 2 parents and his sister. So his family almost mirrored my own family, and I was sitting at the table welcoming him to the United States, processing his paperwork for him, giving him a legal orientation to the United States. And it was a really odd, kind of like zoomed out, like it was like an out of body experience, because it was like kind of like a back and forth. Like I'm sitting here kind of looking at myself in a way, and looking at some like a teenager that's about to experience so much of what I've already experienced in this country. And I just wasn't sure what the proper role was to play as someone so close to his age. And so it was just so many like feelings that emerged out of that particular experience, but it told me the larger story of migration in that region, and how important it is to study the push and pull factors, and study ways to humanely process humans and migrants that are coming to the United States. And so it like got me thinking a lot more about migration scholarship and academia and public policy. And so it was like a really, really formative experience. And then being there, like I mentioned, as a DACA recipient, almost like elevated my experience there, because I had a different perspective than some of my colleagues did.
No, for sure. I mean, that's absolutely incredible that you're able to do that kind of work, be on the ground, like help migrant families like as they're going across the border. Like, it's amazing. I was actually going to ask you just to backtrack a little bit about what the process was like applying for DACA, and looking back on it, reflecting on it. What do you think could be improved upon in regards to public policy to make it easier for undocumented people to receive like DACA?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the process to apply to DACA is really, really extensive and expensive. And so that's part of the reason I mentioned before, like I had certain privileges that others don't. One of the other like hallmarks of the DACA program is that it gives you the right to work. It gives you legal authorization to work in the United States, Excuse me. And it allows you to have like minimum wage jobs, or kind of anywhere that requires paperwork to legally work. It grants you like an employment authorization like distinction. Mm-hmm. And because of that, it's coveted, right? DACA is a coveted status, but it's expensive. The application fees range from like almost it only lasts 2 hours, 2 years. Sorry. Mm-hmm. So once you are granted DACA, your status is only permanent for 2 years.
That's really stressful.
And you have to renew it every single time it is about to expire. Each renewal is almost $600. And so that already is a barrier. The initial application is almost thousands of dollars. So there are all of these monetary gaps that I'm sure you can imagine are there for a reason, and a deterrent for families that, especially undocumented families that can't afford those costs. And so there are many, that's why there's so many undocumented people in this country. A lot of them do qualify for DACA. A lot of them are eligible, but they can't afford it, and so that's why the work of nonprofits is so great, but nonprofits can only do so much, And so my process applying for DACA, my parents both worked 2 jobs each, so they were able to afford it. They were able to afford the application for myself and my sister, but at what cost, right? Working 2 jobs, and especially when we came to the United States, my parents both had certifications beyond what the United States accepted them for. My mom works extensively in the medical field. My dad works in the computer industry. And because of the accreditation differences, they worked, different kind of jobs that they weren't used to, driving taxis, or like washing dishes, being babysitters. And these are all incredible and important like work, but, they weren't able to do what they specialized in and what they studied for in their home country. So it was really difficult to see them have to adjust to a different industry, adjust to a different kind of like lifestyle, but it was part of the process. In order for me to apply, was for them to work jobs that they weren't kind of qualified to work. And so it was rather interesting, kind of learning as I learned more about the immigration process, it's kind of like looking back now that I understand the process a little better, because as I was going through it, I was like rather young, so I didn't really know the intricacies of what was happening, and I didn't understand, part of the process of applying for DACA is also going to interviews and being kind of judged and examined by like officers, and like it's the United States' process of vetting those that are here in this country already before granting DACA status. But it's like, I just want you to picture like
Sounds invasive.
A small room like in the middle of Midtown Manhattan that you just like are sitting there across this like random, I remember this very vividly. I was like sitting across this like random white lady, and she was just like asking me a bunch of these like crazy questions, like, do you belong to a terrorist organization?
Oh my God.
Do you belong
That's
to like,
horrible.
and it's like, and I was like maybe 10 or 11. So like, I don't even know what she's
my
like talking
God.
about, and so it's like, it was a really like, like it's a traumatic experience for a lot of people, and so I didn't even know what was happening at the time. But as I look back and think about the process to even become of my status, it kind of really makes me think about all the other things that my family gone through that I didn't even know about, So my process to apply was intense, but even getting to apply is a privilege. Is kind of why I mentioned that aspect about the costs and the costs associated with it. And CUNY and Hunter has great programs to support students that are applying and kind of mitigating the immigration fees. So it's fantastic what public universities and institutions can do. But not everyone can be a CUNY student, not everyone can be a student. And so that's why part of the policy adjustments that you had asked about is removing barriers like that don't need to be there. It's adjusting the prices, it is adjusting the application fees to reflect the communities that it's trying to adjust to, right? Because if the issue that like not to make it political, but if the issue that folks that are against immigration have is like wanting to have national security and wanting to document every person in the U.S., it's not that folks don't want to document themselves and don't want to be recognized. It's that there's a cost associated with it. There's barriers to that can be removed easily, and so I think it's part of that process that has to be adjusted through policy that could encourage and incentivize people to like document themselves and become a part of our system in that way.
For sure, absolutely. I feel like you made a really amazing point, and it kind of reminded me, poli-sci major, we learned about Max Weber and like theories on bureaucracy, right? And how there's like a multi-step process to, if you want to do even the smallest things, let alone like, getting immigration status or like receiving DACA, right? And so it seems like all of these steps are put in place to, like you said, it's purposeful. It's to make things more difficult, to deter people from like going through the entire process. So yeah, I think accessibility is like super duper important there. And I'm just wondering, like through your major and like through things that you're studying, take all the time you need for this question, but what do you envision doing in the future to help to like lift up some of these barriers and make the process more like a lot easier than it is right now?
Yeah, that is a loaded question.
Yeah.
Hannah just asked me, how do you fix immigration in the U.S.? Okay, let's see. I think that is a great question, though. And I think part of what I think everyone needs to do, and everyone, and by everyone I mean policymakers, professors, students, people, just like everyone needs to understand, is that we have to like reimagine human mobility. And what I mean by that is like the idea of migration has become so politicized that people don't realize that they do it every day. It's like migration is simply movement, whether it's from your kitchen to your bedroom or across states, when you move from a state to state, or across international borders. having that freedom to move, having that that luxury and that accessibility to move places is integral to the human experience, you know?
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, geopolitical events, climate disasters, they're unexplained circumstances and explained circumstances that create issues of forced displacement, you know, from Afghanistan to Haiti. We're seeing it right now, the importance of understanding human mobility and human movement, right? And making it safe and easy to do so. So I think one of the first things that like I hope to like sort of work to do is kind of just have everyone reimagine the idea of human mobility and migration. You know, all of us sitting, whether in this room or at Hunter, we're all like sort of reflections of successful migration journeys before us. You know, we're all mosaics of that. And like, whether those migrations were forced or not is another question, but I think understanding that there is understanding and changing sort of the conversation about how we talk about migration, that it's not inherently bad, but it's inherently good to want to go to different countries, but it's also thinking about why do people leave their countries, thinking about the root causes of people fleeing and the root causes of displacement, you know, and sort of migration is also good if it's a choice of yours, you know, and if you need to flee, if you are forced to leave your home, if you're forcibly displaced, that's different. And I don't consider that migration. I consider that displacement, and that's like sort of the distinction that I make. And so I think in going forward in like whatever flavor career that I kind of carve out for myself, I think I kind of want to work on displacement and migration and kind of really create that distinction, because I think we don't have that distinction right now because everyone associates displacement with migration. But I think there's conscious choices to migrate that we all make every day, but there's also displacement. And I think right now, the United States has a not so great system of processing those that are displaced, and an even worse system for processing people that want to migrate, that want to move here, you know? And so it's creating those different, like it's asking the right questions first. And then it's like also taking steps to decarcerate and decriminalize the process, right? And so right now, crossing the border, right, illegally, quote unquote, illegally, under, not to pull the legal language, but like under under the different U.S. legal codes, right? Under the different U.S. legal codes, it's considered a felony misdemeanor, right? And so once you cross the border illegally and you're sort of charged with felony misdemeanor, now immediately you have a criminal record and you just got to the United States. You did nothing else but that, you know? Yeah. And then in turn, you'll be shocked because of them crossing illegally. They in turn are deported because of them being here in the U.S. with a federal crime. But the crime was coming to the United States, you know, and they came to the United States in those non-legal channels because the legal channels don't provide the safe and proper time waits. So, you know, it's like this really weird and complex process that, you know, I could spend hours like unpacking and talking about. But I think like thinking like specifically about like the steps we can take, it's like, you know, it's decriminalizing and decarcerating the process, you know. Absolutely. You hear about the kids in cages, you hear about the sort of like carceration that happens of undocumented people and of asylum seekers in this country, you know, and it's kind of linking systems that are like and structures that kind of perpetuate the same cycles of violence in communities, whether you have citizenship or not, you know. And because we know like Black and brown bodies are subject to the same violence from carceral states already, and so it's like kind of linking movements as well. And so like understanding that the struggle to decarcerate and the struggle to fight against mass incarceration is actually an immigration issue, you know. And it's like understanding how interconnected these systems are that will finally give us the chance and the language to fight against them. And I think sort of that is kind of the work that I'm hoping to do, like be a connector and kind of like understand and expose kind of these connections and these inequities that, you know, maybe folks haven't connected themselves yet.
Wow. No, amazing. That's for sure. And honestly, Dave, that was like a mic drop moment. Like those were like such amazing points. And Yeah, but I just want to say thank you so much, Dave, for being on the show. It was super informative. I feel like I learned so much. I'm sure the listeners will learn a lot as well. And and as a thank you, I actually brought a
Oh my
bag.
gosh.
Just
No
gotta dig it from under the
way.
couch if I can.
Stop, Hannah. I love goodie bags.
Oh my
got you.
God. No way.
It's stuck. There we go.
Oh my gosh, I'm gonna cry. Stop. I love free things so much. Thank you, CUNY. Oh
Thank
my
you.
God.
All right,
Thank
so
you
this-
so much, Hannah. Oh my God, I love
no,
it.
Of course. No, thank you. And so this is CUNY Uncut, the student podcast where we talk about everything and everything, uncensored, unedited, and uncut. Thank you for watching. Bye, everybody.